Thanks a lot, Kevin. Thanks to Kevin and the Teamworks team putting this together. Thanks to Top Connect. I'm Jim CAVALE. I'm super excited to be here. First of all, this weekend. I mean, how about this Final Four? Amazing set of matchups. And what a great way to kick it off with leaders like Bruce Pearl, head coach at Auburn. Phenomenal season, coach. Nice. Thanks for being here. KORTNE GOSHA, the AD for FAMU, Florida A&M. And Ross Bjork, the athletic director at Texas A&M. And I get the pleasure, as the founder and CEO of Influencer, to get to meet leaders like this and work through this incredibly dynamic time that we're in college sports. And instead of telling you stories about all the different thoughts and wisdom I learned from guys like these, I wanted to have them here to tell you themselves. And also, we might even have some time for questions. We'll see kind of how it flows. But, first of all, NIL, there's a lot of thoughts around it. And one thing that I've been vocal about the whole time as a company that works with 206 Division I institutions, 4,000 teams, 100,000 student athletes, what I love about NIL is it gets athletes to do what you've probably been telling them to do as a coach for decades when you've brought alums and donors into the room for mixers, and you've said, hey, shake their hands and exchange contact information, and these are folks that might give you a job one day. These are folks that might give you an opportunity, right? NIL is finally getting student athletes to work that muscle while they still have the jersey of thinking about themselves as more than an athlete, and that's what's great about it. But there's also a lot about NIL that is intricate, dynamic, good, bad, ugly. There's realities that we have to face. And if college sports is going to move forward, we're going to have to face those realities with alignment, right? And of course, we try to create alignment with technology, but people are people. You have to have alignment from leadership and people as well. And so, Ross, I want to start with you. Let's talk about the first 9 months. Like, just from your perspective, being the athletic director at an SEC institution, what do you summarize the first 9 months as with NIL?
Yeah, I would say that to me it's going as we anticipated in a lot of ways, and then there's also things that have come up that maybe we didn't anticipate. But I think as far as the way we're set up at Texas A&M, we actually were really, really fortunate to be at the table with our state legislature. It was really us and the University of Texas that helped craft the bill that now defines how NIL works in the state of Texas. So we were kind of in on the ground floor, so we knew all the different nuances of it. So I think from a logistics, mechanics, student athletes reporting their contracts through our compliance office educating businesses and fans and boosters, I think all of that has gone really well. I think one of the things that's been kind of a surprise is we haven't seen as much social media activity among our student athletes. We thought, hey, we might have some female athletes that have a lot of followers right now, but they don't have a lot of deals coming in. You see it at the elite level, I think, in college sports, right? You've got the twins out of Fresno State. You've got a couple others, Paige Beckers at UConn. She's killing it. Good for her. But we haven't really seen that part of it. And then we all have and we're going to talk about this, collective. Have we said collective more times in the last 6 months?
There's
we don't even know what does that word even mean?
Have you heard of collective mean? There's directives. There's
directives?
Did you create that word? Subordinate to the collective.
Did you create the word collective? Okay. So now we have, sort of booster activity. When we first set this up, sorry to ramble a little bit, we actually met with our board of regents and we said, here's the buckets that we think it's going to be in. Social media bucket, local sponsorship bucket, and we're going to have donors who like to win. And they're going to form whatever they're going to form. We didn't even know LLCs or collectives at the time, but we believe there's going to be some market where boosters are going to engage with student athletes. And sure enough. So to me, those are the buckets that it's living in, and it's our job to educate and monitor and make sure that student athletes and businesses and boosters are following the state law.
So KORTNE, for you, you've been really vocal. When we first met, we talked about the power of HBCU brands, and we're seeing that with some of the biggest names in sports wearing the marks of Florida A&M and promoting HBCU schools. We're also seeing brands like LeBron, a sub-brand of Nike, do its first ever apparel deal with a college in Florida A&M. You were the first to work with the LeBron brand. How does this stuff start to translate in your mind into NIL? How are you maybe already seeing it translate into student athlete NIL at Florida A&M, and how do you see it continuing in 2022 and beyond?
So very interesting question, and we have certainly started to see kind of the evolution of how this thing will transform, especially in the HBCU space. I'll never forget my first day on the job, December 2019. This came before us in our cabinet meeting as a legislative priority. And so as Ross underscored, kind of the vertical and horizontal communication with your governing body. So our board of trustees, there are so many policies and procedures that kind of came into place in regards to how do we react to really this new space. Corporations, brands now want to attach themselves to major players in the DE and I space, and now there's this element called B, belonging. And so we've taken advantage of that. I think a lot of HBCUs have. And so as we see the evolution of that continue to trend, there's no secret, Jackson State and their quarterback with the Beats by Dre deal. And so if you can create some of these marquee platforms and audiences, it's a way to obviously enhance these deals, these collectives that will continue to come. And so I think the evolution of it for HBCUs in particular will continue to evolve. I think it's a new space because for a lot of companies who haven't really attached themselves to HBCU brands on a small scale, I think those scales are going to get magnified because of the numbers, because of the dynamic that it brings to the table. But then also anecdotally, it required our staff to do a lot of case studies. We didn't realize at the time, we had one men's basketball player with over 1 million followers through his social media channels. And the power that he really had, he didn't understand it. We didn't realize that it was that strong. And so when we compared ourselves to the athletic programs in the state, his numbers outranked all of them combined. And so when you talk about, again, the evolution, when these brands can identify that information, they want to attach themselves to it. And so, we use that as leverage in our negotiations as we start talking about how unique our space really is when you talk about LeBron James deals and Nike, et cetera. And so, again, I think there will be another evolution that will continue to happen, and everybody's got their own wrinkle and how they're approaching this thing. And I think for HBCUs now, it's really looking at the data that's there and driving informed decisions.
Coach Pearl, from a coach perspective and even a team perspective, NIL is new, but it's now a part of what happens in your team operation. Just like you're looking at strength numbers and personal records in the deadlift, or looking at on the court stats, like how athletes are doing with NIL is going to naturally play into the conversation. So just from a coach perspective, what's success really look like in your mind for your team and your athletes with NIL?
Well, I think as a general rule, if it's good for the student athletes, it's good for intercollegiate athletics. And I think that's where you start. Think about your college basketball coaches. We're just now coming off of our seasons. Our focus really hasn't necessarily been on NIL. It's been on try to win and keep our jobs, right? And so therefore we have experts like you, an influencer, and other and our athletic administration that have really been able to take a lead on this. For those that are out in front of it and have gotten themselves organized through their legislature and through the way they're administering it, I think they have a chance to lead and benefit early from this. And I think then everybody else in the room is going to try to see what they're doing and kind of figure out a way to get caught up. I do see this as another arms race. How big's your facility? How big's your practice facility? What's your coaching staff getting paid? Obviously, we're seeing it more in recruiting than we are seeing it on our team. In our team, it's kind of a good thing. The guys are all excited for each other, and I haven't seen any jealousies about why is this guy getting that? Why is guys that are working a little bit? Hey, good for you, and I think that's terrific. I would love to see some opportunities for the whole basketball team to be able to benefit from this particular sponsor, as opposed to this one individual with this one shoe company or or things like that. So I'd like to look forward to, to work in that area. But just like you guys that are here, I'm here, I could be sitting out there too, because I'm trying to figure this out. I always make better decisions when I get better information. And so I rely on great information. And that's the one thing I think that I'm going to encourage Auburn to do, is to listen to the experts. And we're still formulating our plan, and take full advantage of it, right?
Well, it's an opportunity, especially for young coaches. I mean, you were an innovative coach coming up. You obviously did certain things to get to where you are today. For young coaches to become experts on this is valuable for you as a head coach now, building your staff. You have to have somebody in-house that understands this.
I would say that if there was somebody on staff that could run with this and run with it full-time, again, benefiting our student athletes, working really, really closely with compliance. I mean, every box has got to get checked, and there's got to be follow-up, and we want to do it the right way so that the kids can continue to benefit from that. That person would pay for themselves and then some. So if I was a young assistant coach, I'd get really caught up with it. Back in the day, could you do all the video stuff, right? How good were you on the computer? Right now, if you're an NIL expert out there, would you? My cell phone number is 334-750-6064. I got a JOB for you.
All right, Ross, here we go. The emergence of collectives. So the NIL regulatory climate is just like super fragmented, right? Like, some schools have more than one collective. Let's define a collective first. A collective is a group of individuals who form an entity outside of the university with dollars funded into that entity. Usually it's a for-profit entity, but there actually are some 501c3 collectives that are non-for-profit. And that money then sits in the entity and is deployed by some treasurer or managing director to NIL deals for athletes. And so there has to be a value exchange that the collective can show in a contract that says, hey, John Doe appeared at this dinner for $50,000, and it took place at this place and this date from this time to this time. Like, that record has to be there. And believe me, we've talked to some of our schools. The NCAA is already asking for that documentation, especially in deals that collectives are involved in. But that's what a collective is. And so, a common clause in just about everyone's school policy, because every school has their own NIL policy, even if they have a state law, right? Both of you have state laws. Alabama's repealed theirs. Right. A little more flexibility for Bruce. But in their policy, just about every school has a limited involvement clause, right? Schools can't facilitate deals. And it puts the school in a tough spot, because if the student athlete gets hurt, they go to the trainer. If a student athlete struggles with their grades, you help them out with an academic advisor and maybe a tutor. But if the student athlete gets offered $50 a post from a pizza place and wants to ask somebody in the athletic department, well, we can't have liability if we tell them to take 100 and then they tell us later they could have got 150, then we might get sued, right? Not to mention the fact that there's class action lawsuits. Classes are forming of previous athletes who didn't play during the NIL era, who are going to class up and sue schools, conferences. That's all happening right now. So schools, and especially conferences, are scared to provide too much support because of that. So there's these gaps that occur. And even though Influencer provides technology to build your brand, to take payments, to automate tax reporting, we're not there. We're not human beings, we're tech. So these gaps are being solved in a lot of cases by collectives. And it's a really interesting situation that, as a starting point, Courtney, I'd like to ask you, do you think that these outside entities are actually positive for the NIL landscape?
I would have to say yes in some degree. And I'll use us in Tallahassee for an example. There are two major colleges. There's Florida A&M and there's Florida State. I think that it's a community where you're going to see some of these grassroots efforts because of community engagement. They want to see both institutions thrive. They want to see both athletic departments thrive. And so there are groups out there who are going to form these entities that essentially attack the gap. I think the thing that we can do from an administrative perspective is the education. We've got to double down on the education of what's permissible, what's not, be able to try to address some of these issues on the front end. And to your point, it's very litigious. I mean, we're housed in the capital of our state, and it is a political football. I mean, it has been really one of those things that I'd probably say is really maybe occupied about 80% of our time, in some of the things that we're doing. And so I think that they could be positive. I think that they're organically going to happen, especially programs that are very competitive and those edges, those booster groups and things that may be able to formulate, collectives. And so I think our student athletes should certainly benefit. If it's going to benefit the student athlete, absolutely. I think we've got to define our role in these collectives and to make sure that we're not, again, continue to put ourselves in a posture where I think the mission of what we're doing is underwrote.
So, Ross, I want to flip it over to you, and before I do, I just want to make a point. There's collectives that are finding innovative ways to help student athletes activate their NIL for a legitimate value exchange that can be put out on a contract. But the reality is it's tied to, in a lot of cases, the role the player has on the team, the spot they hold. And we'll just use the SEC. If there's 14 schools and every SEC school had a collective raise $10 million to activate with players for football only. Well, only 2 teams are going to the SEC championship. Maybe another 2 teams make a New Year's Six bowl. What are the other 10 schools? Are they going to keep doing it with the players the next year? It seems like there's a sustainability issue with the way these things are put together. Do you agree? Do you think they're sustainable?
Yeah. I think, first of all, Jim did a great job of tricking all of you. So this thing was advertised 3 to 6. So now that we're on collectives, we're going all the way to 6 o'clock with this conversation. By the way, bring the cocktails in here.
And I'll take one.
Yeah. Bring the cocktails in here because we're just getting started. Look, to me, it's too early to say, is there going to be conflict? We just started, we're not even a year into this, right? So far, we have not had anyone say, we're in the middle of a quiet phase of over $100 million capital campaign. We haven't had anyone say, I'm not giving to the campaign because I'm all in over here with NIL, collectives, whatever. We haven't had that. We might face that somewhere down the line, but I think this is so new right now. I don't know if we know is there going to be a collision of a conflict of interest or, hey, Coach Pearl, hey, we just paid your team, everybody got the same amount. Hey, you got beat in the first round, or you got beat by Texas A&M in the SEC tournament. Sorry. Right. Is that going to happen? I don't know.
It's not going to happen again, I can tell you that.
Exactly. That's right. That was on behalf of Buzz.
Hey, Ross, I did the best I could afterwards, try to beat that committee up. You guys should have been in the tournament.
We should have got it. That's right. But Jim, I think it's so new. I think the collectives, they're trying to figure it out themselves. Are they for-profit? Are they non-profit? What we're hearing now may be coming down the kind of the pathway is these collectives may be buying out the rights, all the NIL rights of a student athlete, and then are they going to turn that around and are they going to make money for their own collective, sort of the for-profit model? Hey, I promised you a flat fee of $200,000, but I'm going to go out and sell your rights, and what if they make $400,000?
Yep.
Do they keep the extra $200,000? That goes back into the... So I think the collectives have a lot to figure out on what is their mission, is it for profit, before we figure out, hey, is it going to be a conflict? From our standpoint, does it follow the state law? Does the athlete turn in the agreement to compliance? If there's any red flags in that agreement, we can flag it, we can kick it back to the athlete and say, this doesn't follow state law, you need to change this part of it. Once they turn it back in and they turn in their agreement to compliance, then it's up to them, the athlete, and the entity. So I think it's a little bit early to know, hey, where's all this going with collectives and LLCs and charity groups and stuff like that?
Courtney, we saw the headlines about the $8 million quarterback. So for those unfamiliar, there's an NIL deal that supposedly paid a quarterback $8 million to make a decision for a specific school. But I mean, the collectives at most schools, likely including Florida A&M, aren't necessarily going to generate those types of deals.
Absolutely not. And I will say this: it wasn't Florida A&M, that's for sure. But I will say this:
And it wasn't Texas.
You've had to say that a lot.
But to your point, I think you're absolutely right. I think that, and Debbie Yao said it best. You want to be the best in the class that you're in, right? And that has been our approach that we've taken with our coaches. We're going to talk about how our law comports, where our opportunities. We're in the state of Florida. We don't pay state tax. And so when we're competing against our peer group, that's part of our recruiting spiel, right? It's one of those things that we look for and we continue to articulate. But in the space, this first year, we've had to really understand what is the marketplace for us. Where are the opportunities for our student athletes? How can we position them and their personal brands to be successful? And so we have roughly about 30 student athletes, and we've seen some extremes. Some that are making $50 a post, to your point, and some that are making $10,000 or $12,000 a year. And so I think there's some extremes, but it's going to really be based off of, I think, how we position our brand, how we position the student athletes to be successful. And then, quite frankly, even this legislative session, we were concerned in the state of Florida that our law was going to change again. And so what flexibilities and latitudes do exist? I think we can talk about NIL today. It won't be the same tomorrow, right? And again, I think there's going to be opportunities you see in the state of Alabama where their entire legislation was repealed, right? So that gives greater autonomy and flexibility. And so I think it's really hard to really determine marketplace. I think in the SEC, for an SEC quarterback or a point guard, you might be able to determine that. But that could also change, from state to state.
And so recruiting obviously is a big part of NIL now, or I guess I should say NIL is a big part of recruiting. You said that earlier in your first answer. What is the successful strategy for your coaching staff to talk about it? Because obviously you can't promise a deal when you're recruiting an athlete, but at the same time,
You're not supposed to.
You're not supposed to, yeah. It's a very good point. And so what is your team's strategy, your coaching staff strategy when it comes to answering the NIL questions with recruiting?
So I'll tell you what we're doing, and again, these are things we're figuring out right now. So, at Auburn, it's the SUNY Lee strategy. What we can do is point to one of our high-profile athletes, the greatest gymnast in the world right now, that's a freshman at Auburn, and talk about her, Dancing with the Stars and the different opportunities she's had, and some decisions that she'd made to not do certain things because it would kind of inhibit her in the future. And so what we're able to do is we're able to talk about the athletes that we have right now without promising what necessarily they would get, but certainly that they would be part of that Auburn family, and this is something that that we would work towards. At least that's what we're doing, right now. I'm about efficiencies, right? And one of the things that is challenging for us is that you've got so many different entities that are going after the same dollars. So you've got development at the university, you've got athletic development at the university, and they're going after donors and businesses, and we need that support for scholarship and buildings and foundation work. And then every one of us have sold the rights to our scoreboards and our television and our coaches driving the cars, and then they're out there going to the exact same donors and some of the national contract folks to get money because they've signed a contract guaranteeing the university a certain money, and they're out there. Now we've got the NIL and that other entity. If you took away just university development and let that continue to be what it is, man, for me, wouldn't it be nice to have a sort of a one-stop shop? And if a business wanted to be involved in the NIL space with student athletes, they could do it through that entity. Now, I mean, does that sound like it makes sense to, and I don't know if that's, you may hit me, Coach, we're already doing it,
No, I think it makes sense. I think, I mean,
Because then you've got a good compliance model because everybody's communicating, it's centralized, right? Versus, and then then they're not sort of competing because we're all trying to get there. We're all trying to get there, and there's got to be a good balance.
So
There has to be one.
Jim, so if I can jump in real quick.
Yeah.
So what's fascinating is we all are operating under different principles,
yeah.
right? I mean, the NCAA put out like 2 principles. You can't induce and you can't pay for play,
We thought there was gonna be one set of rules. There's 300.
right? And so what Coach is talking about makes complete sense. But in the state of Texas, we can't set that up right now. I can't have that conversation right now.
Right.
Yep.
Because I have to be walled off, I have to be insulated, I can only check contracts relative to do they follow the state law. But having sort of the one-stop shopper like Ohio State's opening up an office where when you're on campus as a recruit, hey, you're going to talk to the coaches about playing and you're going to talk to academics, and over here is the NIL shop. They have that. They're starting that. I don't know if the doors are open yet, but we can't do that in the state of Texas. We can't have Learfield, our partner.
Which is-
So that's what's fascinating is this is all just a
dynamics.
mishmash piecemeal until there's one uniform legislation.
But don't you think it's interesting that you have that clause in your state bill, and your state bill and almost all state bills were actually influenced by the NCAA's proposed
That's right.
recommendations
That-
that didn't even
that's
become
exactly right.
rules.
And so I said, we were at the table, right? We were at the table with Texas legislature. That was a big discussion part. Hey, you know what? We need to be walled off from this. Hey, we can't be involved in negotiating. We don't know what that does to Title IX. If I'm negotiating contracts, if I have that NIL shop, do I have to offer the same amount of opportunity for women as I do men? Because right now at Texas A&M, majority of our contracts are on the men's side.
Yep.
Exactly.
And so we're trying to help our females get more exposure, develop their brand, do all the things. Can't promise deals, but we're trying to help them. And right now, the marketplace isn't saying that they'll support the female student athletes. So
That's a good point.
there's a lot of legal risk, I think, to us taking it in-house, but we don't know the answer because we haven't got that far yet.
And to that point, Jim, we joke about it in Tallahassee, but the big flip, the Deion Sanders effect. He got a 5-star to go to Jackson State, right? And that 5-star was supposed to go to Florida State. It wasn't a problem with our legislature until it became a problem. Right? And so I think you're going to see, to Ross's point, the principles are changing a little bit, but I think until there's an overarching legislative, act, that's going to be a challenge that we have to face because I think from state to state it's going to change.
Regardless, the multimedia rights holder could have a rate card that they could show the signage sponsor in the stadium if they want to work with the quarterback or the women's tennis star who's also an influencer on social media. Here's what it costs to do that. And they understand that very well, the people who are selling those deals for signage in the stadium. It seems like a natural upsell for athletes to be involved. And it doesn't have to be cannibalistic where it's an either or. Hey, you could work with the athletes instead of the school. It could be in addition to the school, we have a way for you to work with our athletes. And I think that is going to continue to actually happen to promote itself because I think certain MMRs are going to find that as a competitive advantage.
Totally.
So what steps are you taking when it comes to balance of power? So maybe this is theory, and you said earlier this has to play out, and I hear you. But with collectives, there's always been boosters who people knew that booster has power because of whatever it is that he's or she's doing to help the university. But now they're out in the open. It's a collective. And maybe they raise $10, $15 million. And all of a sudden, the recruits know about it and make a decision to go to the school because of that collective or whatever else happens because the collective's there. As an athletic director, and I'll start with you, Ross. I'd like to hear your answer as well, Courtney. Do you start to, you already have a board of regents, you have a president, you have a bunch of people that you have to please and report to. Now you got this collective. I mean, how do you balance that?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing, hopefully before all that takes place, is that you have alignment among each organization. So here at Texas A&M, we have a Texas A&M system, and we have a chancellor, and there's a board of regents. And then I report to the president of our campus, College Station. And so, to me, all four of us need to be aligned. And then we have what we call the 12th Man Foundation. That's our fundraising organization. 501c3, they have a board of trustees. So as long as everyone's aligned to begin with, hopefully another entity can't penetrate that, because all of these people are already aligned. We already think the same way, we have the same alignment, the same principles, the same vision. And if somebody tries to infiltrate that for whatever reason, hey, look, it doesn't work that way. You've got to work through these groups. So hopefully you have alignment to begin with so you can avoid that. And then I think honestly what it does, and this is just the way I look at things in a simple way, is if there is somebody rogue out there, let's communicate with them. Let's make sure they understand what we're trying to accomplish, what we're trying to, our goals and objectives. Here's what the leadership is, here's the structure, and we'll communicate with them and just kind of hit it head on. So that way there's not this behind the scenes activity like, hey, you know what, the collective group that everybody talks about, hey, A&M's recruiting class, it's not 30 million. Is this being recorded, by the way?
Yeah.
Okay. It's not 30 million. Obviously that's a message board. But that group, they came to us and said, we want to make sure we follow the state law. So they worked with our compliance, they worked with our legal counsel. Hey, this is how you set it up so that they could follow the state law. So I think if you have front end communication, hopefully you avoid some pitfalls. And if there is a pitfall, I don't know what the answer is.
Well, before we go to you, Courtney, I would just say I think that being proactive is the approach. I completely agree with you, and I think it's right now the great minority of athletic directors are being proactive and getting involved to the degree you're talking about, and that's where I could see a shift of power being a vulnerable situation. So it sounds like you're taking on the responsibility of keeping everybody aligned.
No doubt. Well, Jim, I'll say, kind of being the young guy on the stage, I think I've lost a little real estate on my hairline, trying to figure that out, and I think we all have. But to your point, I think the alignment on the front end is very, very important. State of Florida, very similar. We have our overarching board of governors. Our board of trustees report to our board of governors. Our president reports to our board of trustees. And so I think now the compliance role in itself, I think, is going to continue to evolve as we talk about the opportunity to engage recruits when they get to campus and certain campuses, or educate student athletes and recruits. But then too, departmentally, we talk about the different pots that you're going to be engaged in NIL, but social media and digital strategy. That is a key component now. I would say that it's changed the job of the traditional SID. I think that that's not the way that things are going anymore. It's now digital strategists and social media influencers through your department. And so I think those are some things that I would say being proactive in that space, but then also making sure that the alignment from the top allows you to create those opportunities.
Yeah, it's mind-boggling to me how we get involved with recruiting, and I'm giving them my best stuff about the guys that have gone to the NBA, and here's their stats when they came in, here's the player development, here's pictures of their bodies before and now. I'm thinking I'm killing it recruiting, right? And the biggest thing is that when a prospect hears that you're recruiting them, and all of a sudden your fan base starts following them, and they start looking at their phone and they go, oh my God, I just picked up 50,000 followers from Auburn. And that matters more than my sales pitch about trying to be a pro or graduating or what our majors are. And so the power of doing a great job with your Twitter and your social media and all that stuff, it affects the kids. It really does. And it could obviously affect them in a positive way, because they can become influencers and things.
Are they asking, the high school kids, are they proactively asking about NIL?
Yeah, they are.
And are they asking?
They're also asking about the social media.
Yeah. All right, we're going to wrap up. We're not going till 6 o'clock. Last question. It's going to be the same for everyone. We're sitting here a year from now at the next Final Four. A&M and Auburn are about to play in the semifinals and rematch from the SEC tournament. And what does NIL look like? What's one big thought you have on NIL a year from now versus where it is today?
Obviously, we would need a state law to change, but I do believe there's going to come a day where the athletic departments are way more involved.
Yep.
Whether that's through a third party, whether that's through an agency, something like that. I do believe, because to your point that you made at the very beginning, they come to us when they need help with academics and counseling and everything else, but we have to say, hey, sorry, good luck, you're on your own. That's not going to work moving forward. So I do think there's going to be a layer where the athletic departments are more involved. What that looks like, the structure, I don't have that yet. But to me, a year from now, and whether that's, I don't think Congress is going to act federally between now and next year. So that's not going to happen. But is there more guidelines from the NCAA? Do state laws get either repealed or changed where athletic departments can be more involved? So to me, that's most likely where this is going to head over the next year or so.
Courtney?
I would agree. I think the athletic department has a role in our state. It's a little prohibitive right now. And I think, some people have attributed it to being the Wild Wild West, and they're absolutely right. And I think that a year from now, and I don't think it's going to happen, but obviously having some type of unified structure, I think that's the direction that we should go. I think it's going to take us some time to get there.
Coach?
Well, the days of the kids calling home and asking for, some spending money, those days are gone, right? Mamas and daddies are calling them saying, hey, how about having to come, what about this trickle down account, right? Yeah. I mean, I just hope in a year from now, we look at it and say it was great for the kids, that, through all the bugs and their families, many of whom, this is a real opportunity for them. A lot of our kids don't get an opportunity to play professionally, but obviously they're probably earning more than a scholarship right now with what they're doing at our institutions. And so the fact that they and their families are able to benefit from this right now, hopefully a year from now we're celebrating that.
Well, I know one thing. There's a lot of big brands that have come to us and said, geez, how do we get all the athletes that have the influencer app to activate with us during the tournament, right? But a lot of them waited long, and I think a lot of them are going to be more prepared this time next year. And whether it's every athlete having a free pair of Beats headphones and the athletic department being allowed to shoot pictures of them walking in the stadium, which they're not right now, so they can then post that to social media and make an easy NIL fee that promotes Beats, or anything that looks like that, those are the type of things that should be allowed and are very easy to activate. And hopefully by this time next year, the low-hanging fruit like that is actually happening to benefit the kids. So really appreciate you guys making time. I know you have a ton going on, each of you. Ross flew in from New York, dramatic game last night in the NIT championship. And I just really appreciate everybody else making time to be here. Thanks again to Top Connect for helping us put this together and getting this wonderful group together. Teamworks, influencer staff, putting this together, and to our guests. Really appreciate you guys.
Thank you, Jim.
Look forward to chatting upstairs, guys.
Appreciate it.
Thank you very much.